The story of humanity is often presented as a single great book, a grand library where each chapter follows the last in a neat, orderly progression. We are taught a comforting, linear tale, from the first spark of fire in a dark cave to the birth of agriculture in the Fertile Crescent, to the rise of Sumer, the glory of Rome, and finally to the technological marvel of the modern age. It is a story of a slow, steady climb from primitive beginnings to the pinnacle of civilization, us. But what if this book is incomplete? What if the library has rooms that have been locked for millennia? What if entire volumes, entire epochs have been torn from its spine, their contents deemed too controversial, too disruptive to the established narrative? Look closer into the margins and footnotes of our official past, and you will find things that do not belong. Megalithic structures built with a precision we would struggle to replicate today. Ancient maps that chart coastlines buried under thousands of feet of ice. Artifacts that whisper of a forgotten science. Anomalies that orthodox history can only label as paradoxes or ignore completely. This is the realm of what some call forbidden history. It is not the history that is simply unknown, but the history that is actively unacknowledged. The uncomfortable truths and inconvenient discoveries that challenge the very foundation of what we believe about ourselves and our origins. It is a history that suggests our past is not a straight line ascending upwards, but perhaps a cycle of magnificent peaks and devastating falls. A story of great ages that have risen and vanished time and time again. It hints at lost golden ages, at civilizations with a profound understanding of the cosmos, of science, and perhaps even of consciousness itself. It speaks of a humanity that was not our primitive forerunner, but our equal, or maybe even our superior. A humanity that was wiped from the slate of memory by cataclysms we are only now beginning to comprehend, leaving behind only faint, enigmatic echoes. For decades, these ideas were dismissed as fantasy, the stuff of myth and legend. But the evidence, etched in stone and buried beneath the sands, refuses to remain silent. It is piling up at the door of academia, demanding to be seen. And it forces us to ask the most fundamental question we could ever ask. Are we the apex of a long, slow climb, or are we merely a civilization with amnesia, living amongst the ruins of a past far greater than our own? To begin this search for answers, we cannot look at the artifacts just yet. First, we must understand who writes the books in our library of history, and why some of its most important rooms remain under lock and key. We must meet the gatekeepers of the past. Chapter 2: The Gatekeepers of the Past. History is not a landscape we discover. It is a story that is told. And like any story, it has authors, editors, and publishers. We call them academics, archaeologists, and historians. They are the cartographers of time, meticulously assembling the fragments of our past, a shard of pottery here, a crumbling inscription there, into a coherent map of where we came from. This map is built upon a foundation of rigorous methodology, the scientific precision of carbon dating, the painstaking analysis of geological strata, the peer review process that scrutinizes every new claim before it is accepted as fact. The great universities, the hallowed halls of our most prestigious museums, and the glossy pages of academic journals, these are the institutions that act as the pillars of this entire enterprise. Their stated purpose is noble and essential: to protect the historical record from fantasy, to differentiate fact from fiction, and to build, piece by piece, a true and unassailable account of the human journey. They are the guardians of our collective memory, the gatekeepers standing watch over the library of our past. Their work has given us the established timeline, a narrative of steady progress that rests in every textbook and classroom around the globe. This narrative is a fortress, built brick by brick over 2 centuries of dedicated scholarship. It is designed to be strong, to be resilient, and to withstand assault from unsubstantiated theories. But a fortress is, by its very nature, a defensive structure. It is designed not only to keep enemies out, but also to keep its inhabitants in. What happens when a new discovery doesn't fit within its established walls? What happens when a fact emerges from the earth that threatens the very foundation upon which the fortress was built? This is where we encounter a powerful and often invisible force in the world of science and history: the paradigm. A paradigm is the collective worldview of a scientific community, the set of assumptions and theories that form the bedrock of their understanding. For historians, the current paradigm is one of linear development. Humanity started simple, and slowly, over millennia, became complex. This model works until it doesn't. When a discovery is made that aligns with the paradigm, it is welcomed, published, and celebrated. But when a discovery is made that contradicts it, it is not treated as a breakthrough. It is treated as a problem. It is labeled an anomaly, an outlier, a statistical error, or worse, the product of flawed research. This isn't necessarily a conscious act of suppression. It is a form of intellectual immune response. The system is designed to reject what it doesn't recognize. The influential historian Thomas Kuhn, who coined the term paradigm shift, observed that science doesn't progress by smoothly adding new facts. It progresses through violent revolutions where the old worldview is shattered by an overwhelming weight of contradictory evidence, and a new one painfully takes its place. Until that breaking point is reached, the gatekeepers of the old paradigm will defend it, often to the very last. And we must remember that these gatekeepers are not faceless entities. They are human beings. They have spent their entire lives building careers, reputations, and a deep intellectual and emotional investment in the established story. To accept a discovery that fundamentally rewrites history is not just an academic exercise. It is to admit that your life's work, your professor's work, and their professor's work before them may have been based on a flawed premise. It is a personal and professional earthquake. The pressure to conform is immense. Young researchers learn quickly that challenging the titans of their field is a path to ridicule, rejection from journals, and the denial of funding and tenure. An invisible college of shared belief ensures that the majority of its members stay within the accepted lines of inquiry. Then there is the crucial question of funding. Archaeological expeditions are fantastically expensive. The decision of where to dig and what to look for is not made lightly. These decisions are often controlled by committees and institutions that are, by their nature, conservative.
A proposal to excavate a well-understood Roman villa is a safe bet. A proposal to investigate a deeply anomalous, paradigm-threatening underwater structure is a career risk. The result is a self-perpetuating cycle. The system funds research that confirms the existing narrative, and the results of that research are then used to further solidify that same narrative. Data that lies outside this loop is often never even collected. It remains buried, unseen, and unfunded. This creates a powerful mechanism of knowledge filtration. Over time, evidence that supports the paradigm is amplified, while evidence that contradicts it is minimized, ignored, or explained away. We see this pattern repeat throughout history. The theory of continental drift, proposed by Alfred Wegener in 1912, was ridiculed for half a century because the geological establishment could not imagine a force powerful enough to move continents. Wegener was not a geologist by trade, and the gatekeepers of the field dismissed him as an amateur. It took 50 years for the evidence to become so undeniable that the paradigm was forced to break. The discovery of meteorites was initially dismissed by the scientific establishment of the late 18th century as impossible peasant folklore, because the paradigm insisted that stones could not fall from the sky. In every case, the gatekeepers were not evil men plotting to deceive the public. They were intelligent, dedicated scholars, protecting a worldview they believed to be true, unable or unwilling to see the cracks forming in its walls. So when we approach the profound mysteries of deep antiquity, we must understand this context. We are not just dealing with stone and bone. We are dealing with dogma and belief. The idea of a lost, highly advanced civilization of the Ice Age is the ultimate paradigm buster. It doesn't just add a new chapter to our history book. It demands that the entire book be thrown out and rewritten from page 1. It refutes the core principle of slow, linear progress. It suggests that we are a species with amnesia, that there is a vast and consequential prequel to our own story that has been forgotten. Such a discovery would be the greatest intellectual earthquake in human history. And therefore, it is the discovery that the current paradigm is most powerfully programmed to resist. Evidence for this lost past, whether it's a geological anomaly on a famous monument, an artifact of impossible technology, or a submerged city on a continental shelf, is almost guaranteed to be classified as an anomaly. It will be attacked, its discoverers will be ridiculed, and the full weight of academic authority will be brought to bear to either debunk it or, more effectively, to simply ignore it, hoping it will go away. The question, then, is not whether there is a shadowy conspiracy to hide the truth. The system of knowledge filtration is far more subtle and, in many ways, far more effective than any conspiracy. It operates quietly, in plain sight, through the mechanisms of peer review, funding, and the deeply human fear of professional ostracism. The real question is this: what happens when an anomaly is simply too big to ignore? What happens when it's not a small artifact in a dusty museum drawer, but a monument carved from living rock, weighing hundreds of thousands of tons and staring out from the very dawn of what we call civilization? What do the gatekeepers do when the evidence they are conditioned to reject is one of the most famous and studied structures on the entire planet? Chapter 3. the stone sentinel, and the scars of time. There, at the edge of the world's most famous necropolis, lies a creature of impossible scale and silent, unending patience. It is the Great Sphinx of Giza. More than a statue, it is a geological presence, a sentinel of deep time, seemingly birthed from the very bedrock of the earth. For millennia, it has watched the sunrise, its gaze fixed on the eastern horizon as empires rose and fell before it, their histories turning to dust and whispers on the wind. It is the ultimate symbol of ancient Egypt, the face of a civilization that has captivated the human imagination like no other. Its official story, the one written in every textbook, is as solid and monolithic as the pyramids that loom behind it. According to the consensus of modern Egyptology, this colossal monument was the work of the Old Kingdom pharaoh Khafre around the year 2500 BCE. The evidence for this attribution is circumstantial, but has been held as dogma for over a century. The Sphinx is part of the Giza pyramid complex, which is undeniably the work of the 4th dynasty pharaohs. It sits adjacent to the causeway leading to Khafre's pyramid, and the valley temple situated before it is built from the very limestone blocks excavated from the Sphinx enclosure. Some scholars have long argued that the stoic, powerful face of the Sphinx bears a striking resemblance to the known statues of Khafre, serving as a divine portrait of the king as the sun god, guarding his eternal resting place. This is a clean, tidy narrative. It places the Sphinx squarely within a known historical context, a masterpiece of a civilization at the very height of its power. For the gatekeepers of history, the case is closed. The Sphinx is a product of dynastic Egypt, an awe-inspiring but understood piece of a familiar puzzle. They look at the monument and see the wind of 4,500 years scouring its surface, the endless desert sand burying and revealing it in a timeless cycle. The erosion and decay of the monument are seen as a simple testament to its great age, 4.5 millennia of exposure to the harsh Egyptian climate. But what if the stone itself tells a different story? What if the scars etched into its ancient limestone body are not the work of wind and sand, but of an element that has been absent from this part of the world for eons? What if the Sphinx is not a testament to the age of the pyramids, but a survivor from a world that existed long before them? The first whispers of this profound heresy came not from an Egyptologist, but an esoteric scholar named R.A. Chwalwe de Lubitsch. While studying the Luxor Temple in the mid-20th century, he made a side trip to Giza and was struck by the peculiar weathering on the Sphinx's body. He saw what he believed were the unmistakable signs of water erosion, and suggested
The Sphinx must be far older than believed. His observations were dismissed, filed away as the eccentric notions of an unqualified outsider. The idea lay dormant for decades, until it was resurrected in the 1980s by an independent researcher and author, John Anthony West. West was convinced that Chwalwe was right, but he knew that to challenge the fortress of Egyptology, he needed more than an observation. He needed irrefutable scientific proof. He needed a geologist, an expert from within the academic system who would be willing to look at the evidence with fresh eyes, free from the dogma of the historical timeline. In 1990, he found that expert in Dr. Robert Schoch, a a tenured professor of geology and geophysics at Boston University. Schoch was a conventional scientist, skeptical of fringe theories, and he traveled to Egypt fully expecting to debunk West's hypothesis in a matter of hours. But when he stood in the Sphinx enclosure, the trench surrounding the monument, and looked at the evidence with a geologist's eye, he did not find what he expected. What he found shocked him. Schoch knew what wind erosion looked like in a desert environment. He'd seen it all over the world. Wind and sand act like a sandblaster, creating sharp, angular, horizontal features, undercutting softer rock layers and leaving harder ones more prominent. Many of the Old Kingdom tombs on the Giza Plateau, carved from the same limestone beds as the Sphinx, showed precisely this type of clear, unambiguous wind erosion. But the body of the Sphinx, and more importantly, the walls of the enclosure from which it was carved, showed something entirely different. They displayed a classic weathering profile that geologists associate with one primary force: falling rain. Schoch saw deep, vertical fissures running from the top of the enclosure wall to the bottom. He saw a rolling, undulating, coved profile. This was the signature of water, vast quantities of it, pouring down over the rock for a very, very long time, cascading down the walls and carrying away the loosened material. The Sphinx and its enclosure looked not as though they had been sandblasted, but as though they had been melted, like a candle under a stream of hot water. To a geologist like Schoch, the distinction was as clear as night and day. The implications were staggering. The fortress of the established timeline began to tremble. The central question became not if this was water erosion, but when. When was there enough rainfall in this notoriously arid part of the world to inflict this kind of damage on solid limestone? Schoch's initial findings, presented at the Geological Society of America's annual meeting in 1991, ignited a firestorm of controversy. The Egyptological community, the gatekeepers of the orthodox narrative, responded with immediate and fierce resistance. They were not geologists, but they proposed a series of alternative explanations to defend their timeline. Their primary counterargument was that the damage was not caused by rain, but by a process called haloclasty, or salt weathering. The theory goes that moisture from the ground wicks up into the porous limestone, and as it evaporates, salt crystals form and expand, flaking the rock.
Away. Another theory suggested that the periodic flooding of the Nile River in antiquity could have inundated the enclosure, causing the erosion. A third argument simply stated that the particular layers of limestone from which the Sphinx was carved were of exceptionally poor quality, and thus weathered in a uniquely strange and rapid manner. Schoch and his supporters methodically addressed each of these rebuttals. While salt weathering is a real phenomenon, Schoch argued that it produces a different type of crumbling, flaky erosion, not the deep, long, vertical fissures seen on the enclosure walls. Furthermore, the worst weathering is at the top of the walls, not the bottom, which is the opposite of what one would expect if moisture were wicking up from the ground. The Nile flood theory was even more problematic. For the river to fill the Sphinx enclosure, it would have to reach a flood level that would have submerged the entire Giza Plateau for extended periods, an event for which there is simply no evidence. And even if it had, standing water would erode the base of the monument, not create vertical channels running down from the top, which are the clear result of precipitation. As for the bad rock theory, this was the weakest argument of all. While the limestone of the Sphinx does vary in quality, it fails to explain the core contradiction. Why do Old Kingdom tombs nearby, carved into the very same limestone layers from the very same geological formation, show clear wind and sand erosion, while the Sphinx and its enclosure show what appears to be water erosion? The age of the monuments should be the determining factor in their weathering patterns. Since their weathering patterns are starkly different, the logical conclusion is that their ages must be starkly different as well. The Sphinx simply does not appear to belong to the same climatic era as the other monuments on the plateau. So, if the culprit was indeed rain, we are left with that one timeline-shattering question. When did it rain so heavily in Giza? Climatologists and geologists have a definitive answer. The Sahara Desert was not always a desert. The last great period of significant, sustained rainfall in this region was during a climatic phase known as the African Humid Period. Between approximately 11,000 and 5,000 BCE, the Sahara was a green and fertile savanna, dotted with lakes and crisscrossed by rivers. It was a land that teemed with life. But as the Earth's axial tilt slowly changed, the monsoon rains shifted south, and by 3000 BCE, the lush savanna had become the hyper-arid desert we know today. This climatic data provides a geological window. For the Sphinx and its enclosure to bear such profound scars of water erosion, its core structure must have been exposed to those ancient rains for a vast period of time, hundreds or more likely thousands of years. This means the initial carving of the Sphinx enclosure must have taken place before the desertification of the Sahara. The geology suggests a minimum age for the monument of 7,000 years, pushing its origin to at least 5,000 BCE. Some geological estimates, based on the sheer volume of eroded rock, push that date back even further, to the very beginning of the Green Sahara period, or perhaps even earlier into the tumultuous wet period at the end of the last ice age, circa 10,000 BCE.
This places the origin of the Great Sphinx not just before Khafre, but before the very first known pharaoh, before the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, before the invention of writing, before the very dawn of what we call civilization. It implies the existence of a highly sophisticated, monument-building culture in this region thousands of years before the history books even begin. It hints at a lost chapter in the human story. This ancient origin also solves another of the Sphinx's great mysteries, the curious matter of its proportions. Many observers have noted that the head of the Sphinx is disproportionately small in comparison to its massive leonine body. This has led to a compelling theory that the Sphinx was not originally a sphinx at all. In its first incarnation, carved in that distant epoch, it may have been a complete lion, a monument to the constellation of Leo, perhaps, watching the point on the horizon where its celestial counterpart rose on the vernal equinox in the astronomical age of Leo, circa 10,500 BCE. Then, millennia later, as the dynastic Egyptians rose to power, they discovered this ancient, weather-beaten monument left by their mysterious predecessors. A later pharaoh,
perhaps Khafre, seeing the eroded form, decided to claim it as his own, recarving the ancient lion's head into his own likeness. This would explain everything. It explains why the head is so small. It was carved down from a larger, heavily eroded original. It explains why the head exhibits far less erosion than the body. It is geologically much younger. We are left with two timelines, two histories locked in a silent battle on the Giza Plateau. The first is the history of Egyptology, a story of 4,500 years, a known pharaoh, and the familiar narrative of human progress. The second is the history of geology, a story of climate, of deep time, and of a forgotten world before the sands. It is a story that pushes the origins of high culture back into the mists of the last ice age. The Great Sphinx remains silent, its riddle unsolved, its gaze fixed on the horizon. Is it the face of a pharaoh, or is it the last sentinel of a lost civilization? Is it a tomb guardian, or is it a message, a warning, a time capsule left for a future humanity advanced enough to read the geological language in which it was written? The scars on its body are a script, and they seem to be telling us that the story we know is not the whole story. They tell us that something came before. To carve a monument of this scale from living bedrock is a feat of engineering that would be challenging even today. If a culture this ancient could achieve such monumental artistry, what other forms of sophisticated knowledge might they have possessed? The Sphinx may be a testament to lost engineering, but other artifacts, scattered across the globe in dusty museum cases and forgotten storerooms, suggest something more. They hint at a lost science, an impossible technology that has no place in the conventional story of our past. Chapter 4. Phantoms of Impossible Technology. In the year 1900, off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera, a group of sponge divers stumbled upon a Roman-era shipwreck, entombed for 2 millennia beneath the waves. They brought up statues, pottery, and jewelry, the expected treasures of an ancient cargo vessel. But among the relics, there was one object that was utterly unremarkable, a corroded, calcified lump of bronze, mistaken for a rock. It sat in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens for
2 years, a forgotten piece of wreckage. But when the lump fractured, it revealed something that would shatter our understanding of the ancient world. Inside were gears. Intricate, precisely cut gears layered in a complex arrangement that seemed utterly impossible. The mainstream view, refined over decades of study, is that this is the Antikythera Mechanism, an astronomical calculator, or orrery, created by Greek scientists around the 2nd century BCE. It is, by this definition, a testament to the genius of Hellenistic science, a brilliant outlier from a culture that gave us geometry and philosophy. It was used to predict the positions of the sun, moon, and planets, to track the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games, and even to foretell the color and timing of eclipses. A remarkable achievement, certainly, the pinnacle of its time. But this explanation, while tidy, falls profoundly short of the truth. As modern imaging technologies like X-ray tomography peeled back the layers of corrosion, the sheer, mind-bending complexity of the device came into focus. This was no simple orrery. What researchers found was a system of at least 37 interlocking bronze gears, some with teeth barely a millimeter long. They discovered a differential gear,
a sophisticated assembly that allows for the calculation of different cyclical rates. This is a technology that, according to our own history books, would not be invented for another 1,500 years, first appearing in the great cathedral clocks of medieval Europe. The mechanism modeled the irregular orbit of the moon, its elliptical path, using a brilliant pin and slot system to vary its speed, an insight into celestial mechanics that our histories credit to Johannes Kepler in the 17th century. It tracked the metonic and seros cycles, complex astronomical periods used to predict eclipses with frightening accuracy. This was not a mere display model, it was a programmable, portable, analog computer, and it comes to us from the age of iron swords and sandals. The questions it raises are as intricate as its own gearing. How was it designed? The mathematics required to model these celestial motions, to translate them into a series of gear ratios and moving pointers, is staggering. Where is the treatise, the blueprint, the design manual for such a device? We have no record of it. And perhaps more baffling, how was it made? The precision required to cut these tiny uniform gear teeth from solid bronze implies tools and techniques that we simply do not associate with the ancient world. To create such a device requires a legacy of knowledge, a tradition of fine mechanics and advanced theoretical astronomy. Yet the Antikythera Mechanism stands utterly alone. Was this the singular creation of a lost Archimedes-like supergenius, a flash of brilliance that was never repeated and whose knowledge died with its creator? Or is this something far more unsettling? Is this mechanism the last surviving relic of a widespread and highly advanced technological tradition? A tradition that has been almost completely erased from the historical record. We see the end product, a ghost of bronze and genius, but the entire scientific and industrial infrastructure that must have surrounded it has vanished. It suggests that the peak of ancient scientific achievement was not a gentle slope leading to our own time, but a dizzying
The height from which humanity fell, forgetting for over 1,000 years the celestial secrets it had once held in its hands. We travel now from the depths of the Aegean to the dry dust of modern Iraq, near the ruins of ancient Babylon. Here, in 1936, workers unearthed a seemingly mundane object. A small terracotta jar, just 6 inches tall. Inside, there was a cylinder of rolled copper sheet. And suspended in the center of that cylinder, held in place by an asphalt plug, was a single iron rod, showing signs of corrosion from some ancient acidic agent. It was catalogued as a ritual vessel of unknown purpose from the Parthian period, around 200 BCE, and largely forgotten. It is known today as the Baghdad Battery. The accepted archaeological opinion is that this object is not a battery at all. The most common explanation is that it was a storage container for sacred scrolls of papyrus or vellum. Over time, the scrolls would have decayed, creating an acidic organic residue that corroded the metals inside. The copper and iron in this view served a purely symbolic or structural purpose, and any electrical potential is a complete and utter coincidence. A simple container for holy texts, nothing more. But when you build a replica of this simple container, when you pour in an electrolyte like grape juice or vinegar, an acidic liquid readily available in ancient Parthia, a strange thing happens. It produces a current, a small
but steady electrical charge of between 1 and 2 volts. It is, in form and function, a perfect galvanic cell, the fundamental building block of all modern batteries. This is not a coincidence. It is a textbook design. The question then becomes not if it could produce electricity, but why would an ancient culture want to? The theories are tantalizing. One of the most compelling is electroplating. Recreations have shown that by linking several of these batteries in series, one can generate enough current to apply a micro-thin layer of gold or silver onto a baser metal. We find many examples of beautifully gilded artifacts from this very period and region. The techniques archaeologists propose for this gilding are complex and often inefficient. But here we may have the missing tool, a simple, elegant method for electro-gilding. Other theories venture into the realm of ancient medicine. Could this device have been used for a mild form of electrotherapy, perhaps akin to acupuncture, to ease pain? Ancient Greek texts describe the use of electric fish from the Nile for just such a purpose. Had the Parthians engineered a more reliable, artificial version of this natural phenomenon? Or perhaps its purpose was more theatrical, more rooted in the mysteries of the temple. Priests holding a hidden device could have given a small, tingling shock to supplicants touching a metal idol, creating a profound experience of divine energy, a tangible connection to the gods. Regardless of its specific use, the Baghdad Battery presents us with a profound technological discontinuity. It implies that at least one ancient culture had not only discovered the principles of electrochemistry, but had harnessed them for practical application. While the rest of the world was powered by muscle, water, and fire, was there a pocket of civilization in ancient Mesopotamia that had taken the first steps into the age of electricity 2,000 years before?
Volta and Galvani. If so, what other scientific principles did they understand? This humble clay pot may not have powered a city, but it powered a possibility. The possibility of a completely different branch of ancient science, one whose textbooks are now lost to the sands of time. We descend now into the darkness of Egypt, into the crypts beneath the great temple of Hathor at Dendera. The air here is still, thick with the silence of millennia. The walls are covered in some of the most intricate and well-preserved carvings in the entire country. But in the deepest, most inaccessible chambers, far from the light of the sun, the artists of Dendera carved something that defies all conventional explanation. Here, we see large, clear, bulb-like objects. Within each bulb, a long, wavy serpent, the filament, leaps forth. The base of each bulb connects to a lotus flower socket, which in turn is attached to a long cable that snakes across the floor to a rectangular box or pedestal upon which a deity kneels. Priestly figures appear to be attending to these strange devices, holding them aloft. The mainstream Egyptological interpretation is purely symbolic. We are told this is a depiction of the Egyptian creation myth. The bulb is a lotus flower, a symbol of creation, and the snake inside represents the primordial serpent god, Harsamtus, being born from it. The cable is merely the stem of the lotus,
and the box is a simple barge or platform. It is mythology, rendered in stone, a complex and beautiful metaphor for the birth of a god from the cosmic darkness. But is it only a myth? What if we are not looking at a metaphor, but a diagram? The resemblance of the object to a specific piece of early electrical technology, a Crookes tube or a Geissler tube, is stunning. These were the precursors to our modern light bulbs, glass tubes from which the air was evacuated, which would glow with strange light when a high-voltage current was passed through them. The serpent is a perfect representation of the plasma filament that would form inside such a device. The socket is an uncanny representation of a high-voltage insulator. The cable, well, is a cable. The box it connects to, supported by figures on jed pillars, a symbol often associated with stability, power, and the backbone of a god, bears a curious resemblance to an electrical generator or power source. This visual evidence is compelling enough, but it is supported by another, far more practical mystery. The tombs and temples of Egypt, including the deep crypts of Dendera, are filled with elaborate, perfectly executed paintings and carvings. The level of detail is extraordinary. Yet, in the vast majority of these sealed, interior spaces, there is no trace of soot. Not on the ceilings, not in the upper corners. The official explanation involves the use of multiple high-quality oil lamps that produced minimal smoke, or teams of slaves constantly polishing away the residue, or a complex system of reflective mirrors to bounce sunlight deep into the tombs. These explanations are cumbersome, impractical, and, in the case of mirrors, mathematically impossible for illuminating long, winding corridors. The Dendera relief offers a radical yet elegant solution. Are we looking at a schematic for a lost form of ancient electrical lighting? A technology that would have allowed Egyptian artisans to work for hours in the pitch-black bellies of their tombs and temples, creating their masterpieces in the bright, clean glow of an electric light? It would mean the Baghdad Battery was not a Mesopotamian anomaly, but perhaps a descendant of a much older, more sophisticated form.
Egyptian science. It would mean that the pharaohs commanded not just armies and manpower, but a mastery of energy that we believe to be the sole property of the modern age. They carved what they knew. And the question that haunts the darkness of Dendera is, what if they knew how to conquer the darkness itself? Our journey now moves from singular artifacts to a more pervasive and perhaps even more profound mystery. It is a technology that left no machine behind, no gears, no batteries. It left only its mark, carved with impossible precision into the hardest stones on Earth. From the basalt quarries of Egypt to the high Andes mountains of Pumapunku, we find evidence not of craftsmanship, but of machining. Travel to the Serapeum of Saqqara, and you will find 25 massive granite boxes, weighing up to 100 tons each. They are cut from a single piece of Aswan granite, one of the hardest materials in the natural world. The official explanation is that these were burial sarcophagi for sacred bulls, hewn from the rock using copper saws, bronze chisels, and diorite pounders, essentially smashing them into shape over decades of manual labor. They were then polished, we are told, by legions of workers rubbing them with sand and water. But place a modern engineer's straight edge against the inner surface of these boxes. You will find that they are perfectly, optically flat, with tolerances that our best modern fabrication plants would struggle to meet.
The corners are not rounded, as one would expect from hand polishing. They are perfectly square, with a precision that screams of high-speed cutting tools. We see this evidence everywhere. In the granite quarries, we find core drill holes, perfectly cylindrical tubes bored deep into the stone. The grooves left behind on the core show a helictical pattern, what engineers call the feed rate of the drill. Christopher Dunn, an engineer who has spent decades studying these marks, calculated that the feed rate of the ancient Egyptian drill was 500 times greater than that of modern diamond-tipped drills. This is not possible with a hand-turned copper tube and sand. It requires immense, constant downward pressure and a phenomenal rotation speed. We see saw marks on sarcophagus lids that are perfectly straight over lengths of 8 feet with no deviation. We find diorite bowls, a stone so hard it will scratch steel, that are carved so thin they are translucent, perfectly symmetrical, and show clear evidence of being turned on a high-speed lathe. The mainstream explanation that all of this was achieved with simple hand tools and limitless patience does not just stretch credulity, it defies the laws of physics. Copper tools are simply too soft. They would deform and wear away almost instantly against granite or diorite. The sheer force and rotational speed required points to a vanished industrial capability. So what were they using? This evidence demands a technology that could cut, drill, and shape the hardest stone on Earth as if it were clay. Were they employing lost techniques of sonic or ultrasonic vibration, using resonance to fracture the stone at a molecular level? Did they possess saws and drill bits made of a material we have yet to rediscover, powered by a source we cannot comprehend? This is the most haunting phantom of all. It's not a single artifact that can be dismissed as an outlier. It is a signature, written across an entire civilization. It suggests that the great monuments of the ancient world were not built with brute force alone, but with a technological sophistication that bordered on magic. It points to a legacy of knowledge in physics, engineering, acoustics, and metallurgy that rivals our own. This was a technology whose purpose was to endure, a technology that worked not in the ephemeral world of circuits and wires, but in the eternal language of stone. The tools themselves are gone, but their work remains, a silent, powerful testament to a lost golden age of engineering. The Antikythera Mechanism, a celestial computer from a time of superstition. The Baghdad Battery, a spark of electricity 2 millennia before its time. The Dendera Light, a potential blueprint for mastering the darkness. The machined precision of impossible stonework, a whisper of lost industrial power. These are not isolated curiosities. They are pieces of a puzzle that we are only now beginning to assemble. They are data points that contradict the smooth, linear progression of history we have been taught. They are the echoes of a forgotten science. Each artifact, each piece of evidence is a phantom limb of a lost body of knowledge, a science that was perhaps more holistic, more attuned to the subtle energies of the natural world, but no less effective than our own. These objects challenge our modern arrogance, the comfortable belief that we stand at the apex of human achievement. They suggest that we are not the first technological civilization to grace this planet. They hint at a past when our ancestors were not primitive, but our peers, and perhaps, in some ways, our superiors. Are we looking at the scattered remnants of a global predecessor civilization, a mother culture whose legacy is now found only in these enigmatic artifacts and in the shared myths of a golden age that ended in catastrophe? Is it possible that humanity has risen and fallen more than once, that great cycles of knowledge are gained and then catastrophically lost, leaving only these cryptic ghosts to remind us of what we once were? These phantoms of impossible technology speak of a lost science, a different way of understanding and manipulating the very fabric of the universe. But if they possessed such advanced physical tools to shape metal and stone, is it possible they also developed a different, more subtle kind of technology, one that worked not on the external world, but on the inner one, a lost technology of human consciousness itself? Chapter 5. Whispers from Beneath the Waves. For 100,000 years, the world was held in a frozen grip, an age of ice. Colossal glaciers, miles thick, locked away a vast portion of the Earth's water, and the shorelines of our planet were vastly different. Great coastal plains, fertile and teeming with life, extended for hundreds of miles beyond our current coastlines. This was the world of our distant ancestors, a world we have never seen, because 12,000 years ago, the ice began to melt
ecosystems and consuming the very stage upon which the earliest acts of human civilization may have played out. We have always assumed that the story of civilization began after this great flood, that our ancestors were simple hunter-gatherers, huddling in caves, waiting for the waters to recede before taking their first tentative steps towards agriculture and settlement. But this is an assumption made from a position of ignorance. We search for our deepest history on the dry land that remains, forgetting that the most hospitable, the most resource-rich, the most likely places for civilization to be born are now lost to us. They are hidden beneath the waves, in a silent, drowned world. It is to this world we now travel, to listen for the whispers from beneath the waves. We begin in the far western reaches of Japan, in the Ryukyu Islands. The waters here are a brilliant, almost impossible turquoise, renowned for their hammerhead sharks and vibrant coral reefs. In 1986, a local dive tour operator named Kihachiro Arataki was scouting for new dive sites off the coast of the island of Yonaguni. As he descended into the silent blue, he saw something that stopped his heart. Rising from the depths was not a reef, but a mountain. A colossal stone monolith stretching the length of a football field, its features so sharp, so geometric, so deliberate that his mind recoiled from what his eyes were telling him. What he had discovered has become one of the most contentious sites in the world, the Yonaguni Monument. It is a breathtaking sight, a series of immense, perfectly flat terraces like the grandstands of a forgotten amphitheater, a towering pyramidical structure with steps ascending to a high platform. Two colossal, parallel stone blocks that appear to have been placed side by side, weighing hundreds of tons. There are features that look for all the world like carved roads, drainage channels, and even a large, vaguely zoomorphic shape that some have dubbed the turtle. It feels, in every sense, like a sacred citadel, a temple complex carved from the living rock, now asleep in the deep. The immediate and enduring mainstream explanation from academic geologists is that this is an entirely natural formation. The monument is composed of sandstone, a sedimentary rock that tends to fracture along straight bedding plains. The theory holds that millions of years of tectonic activity, combined with the persistent erosion of strong ocean currents, have simply sheared the rock along its natural fault lines. The result, they argue, is a geological marvel, a simulacrum of architecture, a place that mimics artificiality but is in reality a grand illusion, a trick of light and geology. But the more you look, the more the natural explanation begins to fray.
Professor Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, has spent over 20 years diving on and mapping the monument. He has identified numerous features that, in his expert opinion, are irreconcilable with the forces of natural erosion. Nature can, on occasion, produce a straight line or a right angle. But can it produce a dense, integrated complex of them? The structure features numerous perfect 90-degree angles, parallel lines, and symmetrical layouts that seem to defy coincidence. There is a feature known as the loop road that encircles a large part of the main terrace, and deep, symmetrical channels that look anything but natural. Furthermore, there are what appear to be post holes, circular indentations that suggest wooden pillars or posts were once inserted into the rock. There are stacked megaliths and individual stones that appear to have been deliberately placed, not just sheared away. Critics of the natural theory ask a simple question. Where else in the world has natural erosion produced something so complex, so architectonic, so utterly reminiscent of conscious design? The answer is nowhere. Yonaguni is unique. If it is not natural, then the implications are staggering. It would have to be man-made, or at least terraformed, a natural mountain that was carved and enhanced by human hands. But when? The geological consensus is clear. The last time the Yonaguni monument stood above the waves, exposed to the air, was at the end of the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago. This date is not a wild speculation. It is a geological fact based on established sea level data. A 10,000-year-old megalithic structure would predate the pyramids of Egypt by 6 millennia. It would predate Stonehenge and the first cities of Mesopotamia by 5,000 years. It would mean a culture with the organization, the technology, and the vision to carve a mountain into a monument existed in a period of history where we are told there were only scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. The silent mountain in the sea off the coast of Japan doesn't just whisper of a lost building, it screams of a lost epoch in human history. It suggests a civilization of the sea, a maritime culture whose greatest achievements were the first to be reclaimed by the rising waters. We now travel halfway around the world, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, to the shallow, gin-clear waters of the Bahamas, off the coast of Bimini North Island. Here, lying in just 20 feet of water, is another of the world's great underwater enigmas. It is known as the Bimini Road. For a half-mile, an orderly, J-shaped path of massive, rectangular, and polygonal stones stretches across the seabed. The stones are enormous, some as large as 15 feet long, fitted together with an uncanny precision. It looks for all the world like a cyclopean pavement, the remains of an ancient harbor wall, or a ceremonial promenade leading to a place now lost. The prevailing scientific opinion is, once again, that we are looking at a natural phenomenon. The Bimini Road, geologists state, is a classic example of beach rock. This is a type of sedimentary rock that forms in the intertidal zone when sand and shells are cemented together by calcium carbonate. Over time, as the beach rock matures, it can crack and fracture under pressure, often breaking into geometric, block-like shapes. The Bimini Road is therefore simply a line of fractured beach rock, its pavement-like appearance being another remarkable coincidence of natural forces. But just as with Yonaguni, a closer inspection reveals troubling anomalies that challenge this tidy explanation. The stones of the Bimini Road are not a single fractured layer. In several places, divers and researchers have documented a clear second and, in some cases, even a third layer of blocks placed beneath the top course. This multi-tiered construction is not characteristic of natural beach rock formation. More compellingly, some of the massive stones have been found resting on smaller, individual pillar stones, as if they were deliberately propped up for leveling, a known technique used by ancient megalithic builders around the world.
Ecosystems, and consuming the very stage upon which the earliest acts of human civilization may have played out. We have always assumed that the story of civilization began after this great flood, that our ancestors were simple hunter-gatherers, huddling in caves, waiting for the waters to recede before taking their first tentative steps towards agriculture and settlement. But this is an assumption made from a position of ignorance. We search for our deepest history on the dry land that remains, forgetting that the most hospitable, the most resource-rich, the most likely places for civilization to be born are now lost to us. They are hidden beneath the waves, in a silent, drowned world. It is to this world we now travel, to listen for the whispers from beneath the waves. We begin in the far western reaches of Japan, in the Ryukyu Islands. The waters here are a brilliant, almost impossible turquoise, renowned for their hammerhead sharks and vibrant coral reefs. In 1986, a local dive tour operator named Kihachiro Arataki was scouting for new dive sites off the coast of the island of Yonaguni. As he descended into the silent blue, he saw something that stopped his heart. Rising from the depths was not a reef, but a mountain. A colossal stone monolith stretching the length of a football field, its features so sharp, so geometric, so deliberate that his mind recoiled from what his eyes were telling him. What he had discovered has become one of the most contentious sites in the world, the Yonaguni Monument. It is a breathtaking sight, a series of immense, perfectly flat terraces, like the grandstands of a forgotten amphitheater, a towering pyramidical structure with steps ascending to a high platform, two colossal, parallel stone blocks that appear to have been placed side by side, weighing hundreds of tons. There are features that look for all the world like carved roads, drainage channels, and even a large, vaguely zoomorphic shape that some have dubbed the turtle. It feels, in every sense, like a sacred citadel, a temple complex carved from the living rock, now asleep in the deep. The immediate and enduring mainstream explanation from academic geologists is that this is an entirely natural formation. The monument is composed of sandstone, a sedimentary rock that tends to fracture along straight bedding plains. The theory holds that millions of years of tectonic activity, combined with the persistent erosion of strong ocean currents, have simply sheared the rock along its natural fault lines. The result, they argue, is a geological marvel, a simulacrum of architecture, a place that mimics artificiality, but is in reality a grand illusion, a trick of light and geology. But the more you look, the more the natural explanation begins to fray. Professor Masaaki Kimura, a marine geologist from the University of the Ryukyus, has spent over 20 years diving on and mapping the monument. He has identified numerous features that, in his expert opinion, are irreconcilable with the forces of natural erosion. Nature can, on occasion, produce a straight line or a right angle, but can it produce a dense, integrated complex of them?
The structure features numerous perfect 90-degree angles, parallel lines, and symmetrical layouts that seem to defy coincidence. There is a feature known as the loop road that encircles a large part of the main terrace, and deep, symmetrical channels that look anything but natural. Furthermore, there are what appear to be post holes, circular indentations that suggest wooden pillars or posts were once inserted into the rock. There are stacked megaliths and individual stones that appear to have been deliberately placed, not just sheared away. Critics of the natural theory ask a simple question. Where else in the world has natural erosion produced something so complex, so architectonic, so utterly reminiscent of conscious design? The answer is nowhere. Yonaguni is unique. If it is not natural, then the implications are staggering. It would have to be man-made, or at least terraformed, a natural mountain that was carved and enhanced by human hands. But when? The geological consensus is clear. The last time the Yonaguni monument stood above the waves, exposed to the air, was at the end of the last ice age, over 10,000 years ago. This date is not a wild speculation. It is a geological fact based on established sea level data. A 10,000-year-old megalithic structure would predate the pyramids of Egypt by 6 millennia. It would predate Stonehenge and the first cities of Mesopotamia by 5,000 years. It would mean a culture with the organization, the technology, and the vision to carve a mountain into a monument existed in a period of history where we are told there were only scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. The silent mountain in the sea off the coast of Japan doesn't just whisper of a lost building, it screams of a lost epoch in human history. It suggests a civilization of the sea, a maritime culture whose greatest achievements were the first to be reclaimed by the rising waters. We now travel halfway around the world, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, to the shallow, gin-clear waters of the Bahamas, off the coast of Bimini North Island. Here, lying in just 20 feet of water, is another of the world's great underwater enigmas. It is known as the Bimini Road. For a half-mile, an orderly, J-shaped path of massive, rectangular, and polygonal stones stretches across the seabed. The stones are enormous, some as large as 15 feet long, fitted together with an uncanny precision. It looks for all the world like a cyclopean pavement, the remains of an ancient harbor wall, or a ceremonial promenade leading to a place now lost. The prevailing scientific opinion is, once again, that we are looking at a natural phenomenon. The Bimini Road, geologists state, is a classic example of beach rock. This is a type of sedimentary rock that forms in the intertidal zone when sand and shells are cemented together by calcium carbonate. Over time, as the beach rock matures, it can crack and fracture under pressure, often breaking into geometric block-like shapes. The Bimini Road is therefore simply a line of fractured beach rock, its pavement-like appearance being another remarkable coincidence of natural forces. But just as with Yonaguni, a closer inspection reveals troubling anomalies that challenge this tidy explanation. The stones of the Bimini Road are not a single fractured layer. In several places, divers and researchers have documented a clear second and, in some cases, even a third layer of blocks placed beneath the top course. This multi-tiered construction is not characteristic of natural beach rock formation. More compellingly, some of the massive stones have been found resting on smaller, individual pillar stones, as if they were deliberately propped up for leveling,
a known technique used by ancient megalithic builders around the world.